I was just hanging out on the porch, enjoying a cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my wife. She told me she was going to be stuck late having dinner with a client that evening. Now, I already had a pretty solid hunch about who this client actually was. So, I didn't overthink it. I just typed back, "Tell Doug I said hello." Not even a minute later, my phone started ringing. I knew right then she realized the secret was out. I didn't rush to pick it up, though. I just let it ring, watching the phone vibrate on the porch boards while I held onto my mug. It was one of those warm October nights we get here in Ohio. The crickets were making a racket, and a neighbor's dog a couple of houses down was barking at the wind. She called back a second time. That's when I finally decided to answer. Dean, just listen to me," she started. She was pleading, sounding desperate. "It's not, please, just don't do anything yet." Her voice was barely a whisper, and I could tell she'd been crying. She sounded like she was hiding somewhere she didn't belong, pressing her mouth as close to the receiver as she could. I could hear a TV humming in the background, some cable show turned down low. Then, I heard a man's voice. He said her name once, real quiet and careful, and then he went silent. I let her ramble for about 10 seconds. She kept saying, "Please," and calling me, "honey," bringing up our 31 years together. Those were words I hadn't heard from her in a long, long time. I just looked down at my boots and the porch floor. I'd painted those boards myself the summer our boy, Kyle, turned 15. Finally, I cut her off. I told her, "Don't bother coming home tonight, Terry." She tried to start up again, but I just hung up. I sat there for another half hour, watching my coffee go cold. I didn't break down and I didn't smash my mug. I just sat there listening to the dog finally go quiet and the crickets keep right on chirping, like the world hadn't just shifted under my feet. Truth is, I knew exactly what was coming. I'd known for a week. The Thursday before, Kyle had called me from Columbus because his truck was making some weird noise. In the middle of the call, he kind of laughed and said, "Hey, Dad, the strangest thing happened." I drove past that motel out by the bypass on Wednesday, and I could have sworn I saw Mom's car in the lot. Couldn't be, though, right? I told him he was probably just seeing things, plenty of cars looked the same from a distance. He agreed, said he was just worn out, and we went back to talking shop about his truck. But after I hung up, I stood there in the kitchen for a long time with the phone in my hand. Wednesdays. Terry always had those late client meetings on Wednesdays. She'd tell me it was commercial real estate and that the showings just ran long. I never questioned her. Why would I? We'd been together 31 years. I didn't go driving out there that night, or even the next. I waited a full week. I figured if there was something worth seeing, it would happen again on the same day. A man my age learns a thing or two about patience. You don't go tearing an entire engine apart just looking for one bad valve. You listen first. You let the noise tell you exactly where it's coming from. That whole week, I just went to the shop and came home like usual. I sat across from her at supper every night. She'd ask about my day, I'd ask about hers, and she lied like it was the easiest thing in the world. I didn't realize back then just how easy it was for her. By Tuesday night, I'd already made up my mind on what I was going to do if it turned out to be true. I just needed to see it for myself first. The following Wednesday, I closed up the shop early, around 4. I told my guy, Ramon, that I had a doctor's appointment. I drove out to the bypass and tucked my truck behind a Dollar General sign across from the motel. The lot sat high enough that I had a clear view of the room doors, but I was hidden pretty well. And there it was. Her car was already parked there, that dark blue Camry. It still had the bumper sticker from the high school where Kyle used to play ball. Some days, I think I knew that bumper better than I knew her own face. I sat there for 40 minutes. I listened to my engine tick as it cooled down and watched a cleaning lady push her cart past a few times. My hand stayed perfectly still on the steering wheel. It was that same kind of calm I get when I'm working on a delicate engine part and I know I can't afford to let it drop. Then, the door to room 11 opened. Terry walked out first. She pulled her coat tight around her and didn't even look around. About 6 or 7 seconds later, Doug Mallory stepped out right behind her. I'd love to tell you I didn't recognize him, but I knew exactly who it was. They didn't kiss or even touch each other. They just walked to their separate cars like people who had practiced this routine 100 times, people who knew better than to touch in a parking lot. Doug's truck was parked way at the far end. Smart move. The kind of move you learn when you've been doing this a while. Terry pulled out and headed back toward town. She was probably going back to the office to finish her day at her desk like everything was normal. Doug just sat in his truck for a minute with his head down on the steering wheel before he finally pulled away too. I stayed put for another 10 minutes before I drove home. Doug Mallory had been sitting at my dinner table for 20 years. He coached Kyle's little league team when my boy was only 8. He sat on my porch every 4th of July. He even helped me pour the concrete pad behind the garage back in '09. He stood up at Kyle's wedding 2 years ago and gave a toast that brought my wife to tears. And that was the man coming out of room 11. When I got home, Terry was already in the kitchen browning some meat for tacos. She looked up and smiled at me, saying it had been a long day. I just said, long enough. We ate at the table together. She talked about some property closing that almost fell through and made sure to use the word client a couple of times. I just ate my dinner and asked her to pass the hot sauce. Our hands didn't even brush against each other. What I was feeling wasn't exactly rage, it was more like that quiet realization you get when you finally see the whole engine and you know exactly which part is busted. After supper, she went upstairs to shower. I sat in my chair with the TV on mute and started putting the pieces together. 2 years of canceled trips. The way she'd stopped looking me in the eye since the wedding. The Wednesdays. The way she started locking her phone when she used to just leave it sitting out. I had every single piece of the puzzle. I just needed one last thing so I could stop lying to myself. I slept in our bed that night, mostly because moving to the couch would have tipped her off that I knew. I wasn't quite ready for the confrontation yet. At one point, she rolled over and put her hand on my back, just like she used to do. I didn't move an inch, and eventually, she pulled her hand away. The confirmation I needed showed up on its own the next morning. That's usually how it goes once you start looking for the truth. Terry was in the shower, and I was at the counter pouring myself some coffee. Her phone was sitting face up on the table. She'd left it that way for 30 years because she never thought she had anything to hide. It buzzed, and the screen lit up. I saw a name I recognized and a single line of text, same time next Wednesday. Miss you already. It was from Doug Mallory. I read it twice just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. Then, I did something I'm actually a little proud of. I didn't pick that phone up. I didn't unlock it, and I didn't start scrolling through her messages. I didn't want to give myself the chance to find even more and lose the calm I had left. I just stood there with my coffee and watched the screen go dark. When she came downstairs 10 minutes later, smelling like that grapefruit shampoo she's always liked, she grabbed the phone without a second thought and tossed it in her purse. She kissed my cheek, mentioned a showing she had at noon, and I just told her to drive safe. I watched her walk out, heard the Camry start up, and listened to her back down the driveway. I poured the rest of my coffee into the sink and sat down at the table where her phone had been. I started thinking, real slow, about how the rest of my day was going to play out. That night, right around 9, that text finally came in, late dinner with a client. Han, don't wait up. That was the moment I finally sent it, say hi to Doug. She didn't roll back into the driveway until 3 in the morning. I was still out there on the porch. The coffee had been gone for hours, and I'd gone back in to refill the mug twice just to have something to hold. Her headlights crawled up the drive, but she didn't pull into the garage like she usually does. She killed the engine halfway up and just sat there in the dark. I could tell she'd been driving aimlessly for hours. When she finally stepped out of the car, it was all over her, the way her coat hung, the messed up makeup, even the tight way she clutched her keys. She walked up to the steps but stopped at the bottom, looking up at me. Her mascara was a smeared mess and she'd missed a button on her coat. "Dean. Please," she whispered. "Let's go inside." "Not out here." I didn't say a word, just led the way in. She went straight to the kitchen and stood by the sink, looking like she might shatter. I just leaned against the doorframe and watched her. I didn't sit down. The first thing she managed to get out was, "I couldn't stay there." I didn't want it to end like this. I almost had to laugh. Didn't want it to end like this. Like she was the one who got to choreograph the ending to a story I'd been writing with her for 31 years. She kept rambling, saying it wasn't what I thought, that things were complicated. She told me she'd been lonely, that I'd been somewhere else for a long time, but that she still loved me. That was the line she really wanted me to buy. I let her finish her piece, then I looked her dead in the eye across that kitchen. "You let Doug Mallory into our bed, Terry," I said. "Doug. The man who used to carry our son around on his shoulders." I told her there wasn't a single thing she could say that night that I had any interest in hearing. She started crying then, really sobbing, and I just let her. Then I laid it out flat for her. "In the morning, you're gonna pack a bag and drive over to your sister's. Don't you come back here unless I tell you to." She tried to say my name, but I cut her off short. "Don't." I went upstairs and slept in Kyle's old room. I turned the lock on that door for the first time in 20 years. I called Kyle on Friday afternoon from the shop, right between a brake job and a transmission flush. I kept it brief, man to man. I told him about his mother and Doug, and that I'd seen them myself. He was quiet for a long time. Then he just said one word, "Doug." "Doug," I confirmed. He drove down from Columbus that night and walked into the kitchen around 11. He dropped his keys on the counter the same way he did back when he was 16 and asked where his mom was. I told him she was at his Aunt Linda's and she wasn't coming back. He sat down and put his head in his hands. I didn't know what else to do, so I made the boy a sandwich. He ate it without looking up once. When he finished, he said real quiet, 20 years he sat on this porch. 20 years. "I know, son," I said. "He coached me, Dad. He was at my wedding." "I know that too," I told him. He looked up at me then. "My boy is 30 years old, a married man and an engineer," but right then he looked 20 years younger, like the ground had just been pulled out from under him. He asked what I needed him to do. I thought about it for a second and told him, "Nothing right now. Just sit on the porch with me for a while, like you used to." We took 2 beers out there and just sat. We didn't talk much. The crickets were still at it, even this late in October. Eventually, we both turned in. I went back to the room I'd taken over, the one with the lock. The next morning, I started packing her life into boxes. The rest of the town took care of the heavy lifting for me. Small towns are a lot like cooling engines, the heat always finds the cracks. By the end of the second week, Doug's wife, Marlene, knew everything. I don't know who leaked it, could have been anyone. The lady who cleans rooms at the Bypass Motel has a daughter who knows our pharmacist's kid. That's just how news travels out here. Marlene called me on a Tuesday while I was under a customer's Silverado. Ramon brought me the shop phone, wiping his hands on a greasy rag, giving me a look I'd never seen from him before, kind of careful, pitying. Marlene just had one question, "How long, Dean?" I slid out from under the truck, wiped the oil off my hands, and stood there in the bay. "I don't know exactly, Marlene," I said. "Long enough." I'm sorry. She made a sound on the other end, not a cry, something lower and heavier. She thanked me for being straight with her and hung up. 3 days later, Doug walked into the rec center and handed over his clipboard. He quit the youth league. I guess he couldn't stand out on that diamond in front of all those dads anymore, half of whom were my customers. The league put out a notice about personal reasons for the coaching change, but everyone knew the real reason. His marriage collapsed within a month. Marlene took the kids to her mother's place in Akron and never looked back. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't smile when the news hit. A man I'd called my brother was being dismantled, and a woman who'd been a good friend to my wife was packing up her life. But I wasn't sorry either. You only owe sorry to someone who didn't earn what's coming to them. About 2 weeks after that night at the motel, I was filling up my truck at the Sheets on Route 30. I was watching the numbers roll on the pump when I looked across the island. There was Doug Mallory at pump 3. We locked eyes at the same time. He froze with the nozzle in his hand and tried to look small, which is a tall order for a guy who's 6 feet 2 inches with a truck everyone recognizes. I didn't move or say a word. I just kept filling my tank. We stood there for 5 minutes in total silence, with the pumps clicking and some tinny country song playing over the speakers. Finally, he couldn't take the pressure. He hung up the nozzle, walked around his truck, and stopped about 6 feet away from me. He had his hands open at his sides, like he was approaching a stray dog he wasn't sure was going to bite. "Dean, I've been wanting to come by," he said. "I owe you a sit down. 20 years, man." I couldn't just. I let him talk. He gave me the whole speech about how it wasn't supposed to happen, how they tried to stop, and how much he hated himself. Then he said the one thing I actually needed to hear: "It's been about a year, Dean. Maybe a little more. I'm not gonna lie to you about that part. A year." There it was. Out in the light where I could finally see the size of it. I clicked off my pump, hung it up, and screwed the gas cap back on nice and slow. Then I looked him right in the face. "You sat on my porch every 4th of July for 20 years, Doug. Don't you ever knock on it again." I got in my truck, shut the door, and pulled out onto the highway without looking in the rearview mirror. That was the last time I ever saw him. Terry's sister, Linda, came by on a Sunday to help her get the rest of her things. Linda's the older sister. She actually held Kyle the day he was born before I did, because I was busy getting sick in the hospital bathroom from nerves. She'd been a fixture at my table for 31 years too. I was out front fixing a loose board on the porch step when they pulled up. Terry went straight inside without looking at me. Linda walked up and stopped at the bottom of the steps with her arms crossed. "You're feeling pretty righteous right now, aren't you, Dean?" she snapped. I just set my hammer down. She kept going, telling me I must have known. "Maybe not the man or the room, but you knew. For 2 years you've been coming home and sitting in that garage without saying a word to her. You let her starve out here, and when she finally went looking for a meal somewhere else, you got to play the wronged husband. Real convenient. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to defend myself so she had something to push back against. That's just how Linda is. I didn't give it to her. Maybe Terry really believed that version of the story, or maybe Linda just needed it to be true so her sister wasn't the only one carrying the guilt. Either way, I wasn't having that conversation on my own porch. I picked up my hammer, drove the nail in, and stood up. I just looked at her and asked, "You done, Linda?" She opened her mouth to say more, then thought better of it. I walked past her into the house and shut both doors behind me. I sat at the kitchen table until I heard them load the car and drive off. Once the sound of the engines faded, I went back out and finished the step. 4 months later, I signed the final divorce papers at my lawyer's office. Don Corelli slid the folder across the desk, I signed on the line, and he stamped it shut. "That's it, Dean," he told me. "The house is yours." She leaves with her car, her clothes, and what was in her name. Not a dime more. I shook his hand, got in my truck, and went straight to the shop. I had a Silverado on the lift that I'd promised by Friday afternoon. Ramon had done most of the work, but I got under there and finished it up. We rolled it out by 4:30. Around 6, Kyle called. He was asking if he could bring his wife's Tucson down on Saturday because of a knock in the front end. I told him I'd have the lift open by 9. He went quiet for a second, then mentioned his mother had called him. She was settled in Columbus now and had asked how I was doing. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her you were busy," he said. I let out a short laugh, and he laughed too. "Drive safe tomorrow, son," I said. "Yeah, Pop," he replied, and hung up. I killed the lights, locked the shop, and stood in the lot for a minute looking at the sign, Dean Hollister Auto. It was my dad's lettering before it was mine. I drove home, made a sandwich, and ate it standing up before heading to bed. Saturday, Kyle was coming over. Monday, I had a transmission to pull. That was the week. That was a year ago. Terry's still in Columbus. Kyle told me she married some guy from her firm last spring. Doug never came back from Tennessee. Marlene moved on with the kids. The shop is busy, and the house is mine. That's the whole story. Thanks for the likes and the support. Make sure to subscribe, there are plenty more stories like this one that need telling.